Hello and welcome to this video. Today I decided to make a Fimo or in general polymer clay cup for my kitchen. I always have the problem with some sauce bottles that there's a lot of leftovers getting stuck in there and I need to turn them onto the lid to have it flow down the sides of the bottle. But I don't really have a container where they fit in that well, so they tilt to the side a bit and then I need to wait for the sauce to run down more and all that kind of stuff. Or they tip over a little bit if I don't put them into the container, and then I have to open a new one before I can use up the leftovers. So I decided why not make a fitting container to be able to turn them up on their lids without them falling. And I didn't want to buy anything, and I also wanted to work with clay a bit more since it's actually quite fun, or at least I have quite a bit of fun working with clay. So, I decided just to roll with it and use my colored clay to make a fun little container or cup. And I wanted to make it more like natural tones to fit in my kitchen, because in my kitchen most things are wood or darker tones. So this will fit perfectly, and I decided to make a cup with some vines on it. Now the colored clay I have here is mostly Fimo brand, but I'm also going to use some other clay later on. And all of this needs to be conditioned because it's quite old and quite dry. So I'm just chopping it up into tiny pieces and then adding some magic cyanide liquid, which is basically just a natural oil to condition the clay. And yeah, here I did a dum-dum, or at least an accident happened. I always am very careful with this blade to make sure I don't have the blade facing up when I'm cutting, but because of the lighting I use for filming, it reflected so much I couldn't tell, and I thought that I had it the right way around. Yeah, I cut into my finger pretty deeply, as you can see. I'm just wearing the band-aid because of me having the fear that I'd get clay in there. But actually it didn't bleed at all, even though it was a deep cut, and it healed pretty quickly and it didn't leave any scar behind or anything, so it was totally fine. But yeah, it was pretty in this situation. So again, always be careful with these kinds of blade. I always mention it in the stream because I knew this can happen. The only other time I cut myself with this blade was actually when I got it out of the original packaging, so I knew how sharp it was. But yeah, it happened, even though I always mention that I'm very careful with that and that others should be very careful with that, but I guess, goes to show accidents like that happened. But I always have band-aids on hand in my craft room, and again, it didn't bleed at all, so I was totally fine. Now I used the container to gauge how much clay I have, and I originally wanted to just use the brown clay, but yeah, again, it wasn't enough. So I conditioned some Sculpey Original, and this one I'm not gonna use any of the liquid clay. If I cut it into these thin sheets and then roll it through my pasta machine, always not bulking it up too much, so only folding it over once instead of twice like I would do with other clays. It actually rolls through totally fine without crumbling too much, and that means I just have to roll it through multiple times without having to pick up any of the tiny crumbs falling through, usually happens with a decent bit of other dry clays, and it conditions just fine without any liquid oil or conditioner. Also, I'm using the Cerner brand here because it's actually easier to get over here, but I know that Sculpey has some brand, and I know that there's some other ones out there that have liquid clay. Honestly, I also used baby oil before, and it works. I found dissolved the clay a bit more than whatever oil I'm using here. Either way, you have to always be careful to not use too much, but the clay conditioner works really well if you have tough clays, and chopping it up into fine pieces and then mixing it up with it actually works really well. You can even mix it in a plastic baggie if you don't want to touch it too much, the oil too much, but it's just a natural oil, it doesn't do any harm to your skin or anything. I guess besides maybe help with skin dryness. But yeah, all I did was basically roll out the brown clay then, and I tried to marble it a bit before rolling it into my pasta machine and just putting blobs of the other colors in this. It kind of disappeared a little bit by the time I had it thin enough, but it still had a little bit of the marbling. it just completely went away once I bake it, but hey, I tried. But yeah, I had to roll this out pretty thinly, so I had issues with getting out the air bubbles. And also because the Sculpey Original doesn't stick that well, it's like a very dry clay, I also used some Bake and Bond and covered the whole surface. And then in the end I just had to poke through all of the like larger air bubbles. I don't mind some texture, but I really don't want any of them to like crack or anything, or be too large and like totally like ruin the piece. And in the end it worked out pretty well. I added some isopropanol with my brush to like smooth the surface out to get rid of all the fingerprints, and then I baked it. Had to peel out the clay with a little tool, but yeah, here you can see the tiny air bubbles. They're noticeable, but not that much, and honestly after I put the plants on, the vines on there, you cannot even notice them at all anymore. I didn't have enough clay to cover the bottom or the inside, but I knew it would be fine because Sculpey Original tends to brown quite a lot, especially if you do multiple bakes. And when I do these kind of bakes, I only put it in there for like 10 minutes. The clay I'm using usually recommends 20 to 30, but when I power bake this, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on the thickness of the bead, is totally working out. And then just at the final bake I'm putting it in a bit longer, because I don't want the clay to like overbake and burn, because if it burns it like gets rigid and then it cracks very easily, and normally like clay, this kind of clay, when it's warm at least, it stays soft. So that's actually a good marker to see if you overbaked it, because if it's still soft when it's warm, even after multiple bakes, it's actually quite good and okay to bake it again. If it's turning rigid, that means you should stop, because the likeliness of the piece cracking is very, very high. And then you get problems with, you know, especially if you make figures and stuff, falling off limbs, and every time you try and fix and bake it, it's just gonna shrink more and crack more, and yeah, it's very sad for if you do like a sculpture or something where you want to do multiple bakes to save your progress. So rather underbake it and not have it fully baked on the inside, but have the outside sturdy enough to work on, than actually overbake it. Anyways, for the leaf, I knew that I had to do so many that I just decided to make a mold. So I'm sculpting a little leaf here. Let me know in the comments down below if you can guess which kind of vine plant I'm going for here. And I will reveal it after I made the mold. So yeah, just put your guesses down below, and you know, if you're right with your guess, I guess give yourself a cookie or a pat on the back or something. But yeah. Either way, after baking the leaf, it was time to make a mold. And as you can see, it's actually staying decently flexible, and that's actually like Fimo is a bit flexible, but not that much. And actually that's one of the helpful things about conditioning it a bit more with the oil. It like helps it stay a bit more flexible. It's not gonna reach a flexibility level of what, for example, like a Cosclay does, because that stuff just is a different material inherently, but it helps with it not breaking too easily. Either way, I mixed up my silicone here, made a mold out of a leftover cup piece that I used for another mold, and I just made sure to like tape it with some painter's tape. This painter's tape I'm using here is working greatly for this. I used it so many times, but I found that honestly any brand painter's tape, as long as it's not old and sticks properly, works really well. But you can also use packaging tape and stuff, or bezel tape if you want to. But yeah, as you can see, it worked pretty well. It held down the piece, and after a while I could demold it, and I had my little form here. Now the green clay I mixed up, I conditioned with a bit too much oil, so it actually became very sticky, and I had a hard time getting it out of the mold. I tried to apply some Bake and Bond, which I needed anyway since I was working on a baked surface here, and I got it off on one side. I then tried to use my silicone tool, and yeah, no. It completely like pulled off the clay. You can really see how stretchy the clay is. It's more like, yeah, it's not really the like texture you want clay. So I knew that I couldn't really fix this, so I tried some oil. I just literally used the same magic clay conditioning oil that I used to condition the clay, put it into the mold and spread it very thinly around with my finger, and it worked wonders. It actually worked so well. Now the clay is still a bit too soft, so I need to be careful about not smushing it, and I needed to add some details back in, and blending the sides also kind of helped it to like look like it was, you know, belonging to the cup more. But it worked super well after the other stuff. I did also make these vines, and in this case I purposefully actually used a bit more oil. Not as much, too much as I did with the leaves, but I wanted that once I add the texture, I wanted it to basically like be a bit more soft, to like drag the clay around a bit more, if that makes sense. So I made it a bit softer than I normally would, and then I put some random like vine shapes onto the container with my Sculpey baking mold. And I just added the vines randomly. I want them to have a bit more of a natural texture, but not be too overly realistic. Like, I wanted to fit the vibes of the leaf still. So I'm also adding these tiny branches that will lead towards the leaves, and I'm gonna add a ton of them. I mixed up a little bit too little of the green clay. Like, I mixed up a great lot, but like I didn't have that much of one of the colors anymore that I mixed in naturally. So basically I mixed up everything of that one dark green I had, and in the end I didn't have enough to cover all these tiny branches like I originally planned, but I think in the end it worked out really well, and that gave it more of a natural look. Now in the beginning I always added the leaves one after the other with the like silicone mold, like pressing it onto the container, and it did smush the leaves once or twice. You can see one of the first ones I added there looks a bit, well, smushed, and I had to fix it a little bit. So in the end I just decided to work on the branches, add all of the tiny ones, blend them in, and give everything its texture before adding more leaves. And I think that was a good decision because it actually worked out pretty well in the end. So what I did is I added all of these teeny tiny branches onto the main vines, and then I used my silicone shaper to blend them in together and to add some like tree texture. I just like basically used the tip of my tool to press it in to give it more of like these lines, like, you know, you would see in actual trees on the bark and stuff. And it worked out super well, and you can actually see how soft the clay is by how much it moves around with the tip of my silicone shaper here. But it's not too soft to where it actually like just smushes. When I try to texture it, it just has this more natural like swoosh. It like keeps the texture in a more natural flowing way, which is actually perfectly what I wanted and what I hoped I would get. Like, I didn't know if actually over conditioning the clay a bit would work or not, but it worked out perfectly, and in the end the texture turned out beautifully. And as you can see, after baking I'm just adding some more baking bond and then more leaves. Now, I was prepared to bake this a couple more times and just add the leaves one by one with the silicone tool, but I also wanted to try something different, so I made leaves just on this little acrylic sheet. This is just an acrylic panel that I got from an old picture frame and I've used since years for clay work, since it works really well and it's clear and you can see through it when you need to press something flat or something. And it also works for working on top of it with the clay and then just cutting it off. Basically I'm using the very thin blade here. I found that works best, or if you have a razor blade, one of those flatter, larger ones, you can also use that to carefully do a seesaw motion and then pick it up, and it actually curls one of the ends, which is perfect for using a silicone shaper tool to pick it up and place it where you want. And then I could basically just work on every single leaf individually after placing it, blending the edges in a little bit, giving it maybe a little bit of a swoop on the tip to have it look a bit more in movement or a little bit more natural and not as if I copy pasted all the leaves, even though I kinda did, you know? But yeah, in the end it worked out really well, and actually with this method I didn't have to bake them on multiple times. I could just add the leaves and then like add the others on top without having to save my progress here. Now I did have to pay attention to like not smoothing the leaves with my hands, which happened here. I totally like touched it with my finger and I had to rework the tip, but it worked out really well. It actually only happened once or twice. I was really careful to not touch any of the leaves because again the clay is a bit more soft, so I needed to be very careful about not ruining any of the pieces. Yeah, as you can see, it's filling up really nicely, and in the end I think it turned out really well. After I used up all of the green clay I had, I mean I literally used the leftovers to like push it into the mold to get one last leaf out of there. I basically baked it and then it was time for washes. I wanted to add some depth, especially since I spent so much time sculpting all these branches or vines. And now I can actually reveal which plant it is. Let me know in the comments down below if you haven't totally guessed it by now that I added the branches and more the leaves, if you got it right. And of course it's ivy. I decided to go with ivy because I just love how it wraps around things with the branches, and I thought that would be perfectly fitting for this cup. And yeah, what I'm doing here, basically ivy leaves are very light. Ivy leaves are very light in the center, so I added this lighter tone, and I'm using Vallejo acrylics here. These are model paints, so they stain a bit more. And I was careful, but while wiping off the excess, especially with the towel, I got a lot of green everywhere. So I had to remove it with my blade. There was some spots around the leaves that I couldn't get off, and those were the spots where some of the bacon bond basically stuck out still underneath the leaves, and it just grabs onto the paint. I just couldn't get it removed as much, but from the rest of the spots I could get it off pretty decently enough to where I was happy with it. And then I just covered the branches and the background again with like this darker brownish blackish wash. And this helped to get the like textures of the branches to really pop. I tried to avoid the leaves since they were a bit more bright inherently naturally anyways. And I think it worked out really, really well. It covered up most of the like spilled over green, and you know, a little bit of this green like naturally in that left in the background actually blends it really well with the branches. So actually in the end it turned out super well, and I'm absolutely happy with how this cup turned out. Didn't paint the inside at all because I knew again the clay would turn really dark, as you can see. But again, it's not burnt at all, it's just what happens naturally, especially with Sculpey Original. And yeah, I just love how the vines wrap around the cup and how naturally textured they are. So I'm super happy how like my idea with like over conditioning the clay would work. It actually came to me when I was working on the leaf because I noticed how much more it like pushes the clay around, and I wanted to try that for them, and yeah, it worked out super well. Either way, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this cup, and if you would make like a cup to decorate your kitchen or something like that, or a storage container, what kind of decor would you choose? Would you also go with plants? Would you add animals? Some kind of fun colorful decorations, like maybe colorful dinosaurs or something like that? Or would you maybe make your cup a fun shape, like for example made the cup shaped like a dinosaur chicken nugget or something like that? That actually sounds like a really funny idea, to have like a dino chicken nugget decorated cup for your kitchen. But yeah, either way, let me know all that in the comments down below, and let me know what you thought of my cup. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope as always that it inspired you to maybe decorate your own cup. And I hope to see you next time. Have a great day. Bye bye!